How's it going, everyone? So in today's video we're going to be breaking down a track by Stussy called Desire. This is what it's going to sound like. So as always, if you want the project, then I'm going to be linking that in the description, just in case you want to kind of dive into the sounds further, or in case there's something I don't go into in as much detail. So definitely check that out if you want. And yeah, let's just get into it. First thing is, of course, the kind of vocal. You've basically got the kind of main vocal there, which is like an a cappella, and then you've kind of got these extras and stuff, which basically just recycling elements of the original. So you've got this vocal here. The way you kind of get these vocals, if you're wanting to take them from like existing tracks, is by using like vocal remover tools. So if you kind of want to utilize acapellas that already exist and kind of do your own edits of them, then that would be the kind of way to do it, and it's kind of how I've done it for this track. So I've basically run this vocal through a vocal remover plugin. I've essentially got the full kind of acapella, and what I've kind of done is I've split it up into the actual sung part and the textures. So you've basically got the kind of sung a cappella, and then you've got the kind of textures. They're like vocal chops. So what I'd imagine him doing here is essentially taking these kind of vocals and basically just dropping them into your kind of standard simpler. So you can do this in loads of ways. You could go to the simpler and you could hit slice and get these different chops, or you could literally just find the start of the sample you want and do that way, or you could even go slice to new MIDI track on a kind of vocal sample. You could basically slice it up and get your own kind of like vocal chops. So that's kind of what I'd imagine him having done with this. So that's like one kind of syllable, so I've kind of tried to emulate it down here, just by taking the kind of one hit and just having that kind of texture there. So basically just playing around with the original vocal to create something new using elements you've already done. So that is the vocal. The next thing we have is the drums. So up first we have the kick, which is kind of pretty standard. With regards to the samples for this, obviously I'm trying to recreate that kind of Stussy style, so a lot of them are those sample market Stussy drum one-shots, which are pretty good. I tend to find these samples are kind of more processed than the kind of usual raw ones you get, but they're still pretty solid. For the actual MIDI, you've of course got these ones that are 4/4. He kind of goes between the houseier patterns and the breakbeat patterns quite a lot. So he's basically introduced this kind of like breakbeat kick. So nothing really more to the kick than that. We've got multiple snares going on. So we've kind of got that snare groover, and the kind of thing that's a bit more interesting to this is there's multiple snare grooves. So I'll play these together. I've talked about this before with like melodic patterns, they're kind of doing the same thing at times, but then they're also working independently of each other. Together, they contribute like a really nice kind of groove. And then we bring in the clap. The clap kind of does something similar to the top snare, but also does its own independent thing. So it sounds like it's kind of tripping up over each other, but if I play it with the full kind of drums, so that's kind of like the three main sounds, and then you've got these kind of variations which are like the more constant fills you normally expect. Just kind of like classic fills, like building up. Something that I'll mention now actually is I've not really used much in terms of processing. Like by this point you'd probably expect to see a decent amount of processing with regards to like reverb and delay. The reason I've kind of held back a bit on them is because I've used two kind of sends and returns. So one's a kind of drum reverb and one's a kind of synth reverb, and they both use the Valhalla Vintage Verb plugin, which is like probably one of my favorite reverbs. I've basically just found a nice kind of preset to suit. The next thing we have is the hats. So we've got this closed hat, which is like your offbeat one, but with like doubled notes. We've got this other one, kind of playing that rhythmic closed hat pattern. So we've got that, which kind of bounces off the top one. The thing that's making this quite nice is it's got a vocoder on it. So basically got that on and set it to noise. This kind of setting on the vocoder is just perfect for elements like hats, just to add a bit of character. Got this open hat, which is literally just the main open hat. We've got this one, which is the same kind of thing, but just another layer. Both kind of different sounds of different characters. Got this shaker, just a kind of almost like a percussive kind of hat. Got that, and then just got a kind of tambourine. So that is essentially the drums. The next part we move on to is the bass. We start with this kind of like top layer, which is kind of like the main bass in this. So it's basically a pattern that's in A flat minor. This is one of those patterns that starts on the root note and basically just has some variation. This is like the simplified version of the bass. What's then being developed is these kind of layers. So kind of like funky pattern there. Then we've got a different one. Patch itself is actually just a sample from the Piff Coulter pack, but it's kind of like that classic guitar bass kind of sound. There's a patch that I know like Coulter and Robbie Doherty use. This one here, guitar bass, which this is kind of what it reminds me of. And then the processing is just kind of standard processing for bass lines where EQ'd like that, a bit of kind of character adding with overdrive and a bit of saturation. So that's kind of like the main bass layer. He's added a bit of variation in this with this kind of a reese bass. So for the actual sound I've also used a sample, but in a similar way to that kind of top bass, there's loads of good kind of reese bass presets in the kind of stock Ableton patches. I've actually recently created a kind of minimal house bass preset pack using just Ableton stock, which includes, I think it's 2 different Reese presets, so I can just kind of check them out now actually, just to kind of show. Just a really nice kind of subby Reese pattern, which just provides a bit of variation for them from that kind of analog top bass. So I've obviously got those presets which you can check out, I'll leave them like below, but I've just used the sample in this case. So that is essentially the bass. The final kind of part of this track, which I think kind of makes it, is the synth work. So we've got loads of different layers going on, starting with the kind of chords. Just like these kind of organ chords. They're basically playing 5 notes down from the kind of root. You can either go 5 up or 5 down, basically create these kind of like 5th chords. So it's a fairly basic kind of chord pattern, but it just works. I think the kind of purpose of it isn't intended to be a really complicated pattern, it's kind of just intended to be those kind of driving chords. Then we've obviously got these kind of change ups. So that's this kind of like organ chord, and then the thing that's kind of making it is it's got this kind of like delay. The delay's not really there to add delay as such, it's kind of there to do the kind of Hass effect almost, to basically increase the kind of perceived effect of how wide that sound is. So we've got those chords, we've got the kind of main piano one. These like pretty grand chords, basically the kind of A flat minor triad, and then it's got the F sharp, which would be the 7th, and then the A would be the 9th. Because it's been paired with like a really spacey reverb, it makes it sound bigger. So that kind of combination of big chords that span 2 octaves and a large kind of reverb really helped to give it that character. Of course, the sound also kind of matters. Basically use this kind of preset from, I think it's like the Triton acoustic piano. Actually one of the first kind of presets. The Triton's quite good for those kind of pretty realistic sounds. So these kind of chords, I think they're quite good in this kind of track because they're kind of really emphasized and they just kind of bring a new dimension to the track. The way I see this kind of pattern is he's got the kind of main chords, the emphasized ones, but then there'll be times where he'll add these kind of filler rhythmic ones, which creates these like really kind of jazzy kind of rhythms. So these kind of patterns, having these kind of like offbeat melodic chords can just be a really nice way to make it more rhythmically interesting, I guess. So this whole kind of chord pattern and just the way he's done his synths in this track, I just think works really well. The sound itself is obviously going to be very important for you to be paying attention to, but you can do a lot with processing to bring out certain characteristics. I've basically just got a kind of subtle boost to add a bit of high end. Kind of basically trying to get that kind of piano noise character that you sometimes get with these instruments. We've got the kind of Hass for widening. We've got an actual delay this time, and then erosion's a really good one for adding character to most kind of melodic instruments. Like I'd sometimes add it to the bass for a bit of grit, and that's kind of the same reason it's been added on this chord. So that's the chords, and then we finally get onto the lead that I just think makes this track amazing. Like I was talking about how good the chords are, but I think this track is just on a different level when this lead comes in. So he's got this kind of like, it's kind of hard to describe the sound, but it's almost very chorusy. It's almost like got a bit of like glide and portamento on it. So it's kind of what it reminded me of, and I basically ended up with this. Kind of almost more chordy. So I think the main place to start is with the actual patch itself. What I've basically done is I've taken a kind of square wave, I've put it up 7 and detuned it slightly. Then I've added this kind of triangle wave, detuned that the other way. The glide basically creates that kind of glide when you play between 2 notes. Vibrato adds that kind of chorusy effect we were talking about. And the big reveal is I've kind of used this effect. I think it might actually be one of the free ones by Valhalla. There's a few of them, and use this kind of preset called Deep Chorus. So that is essentially this sound in the patch. Then go back to this like lead. You've essentially got these kind of notes. So kind of working up the scale and then back down, but overlapping notes so it creates that glide portamento effect. And then you've also got these kind of like fillers, which is just incredible level of attention to detail, really. Like I can't really sit here and be like, this is how you do it. It's just fine tuning and experimentation. So yeah, that is essentially the leads, and then the final kind of thing is these kind of different pad layers. So I've basically got these kind of chord patterns and different kind of types of pad. One's this high pad. You'll see it starts a bit later. And it also kind of plays off this kind of string pattern. So essentially having these kind of like background layers just to sit and keep things going, because if you don't have them, you can tell something's missing. So that is essentially the pads, and also concludes the synths. So yeah, that's pretty much gonna be it for this one. I hope you learned a bit more about that kind of Chris Stussy sound, more specifically breaking down his track Desire. I will be doing some more covering this artist, so definitely stay tuned on that. Remember, if you want the project, I'm gonna be leaving that one down below with our Patreon, so definitely check that out. I'll also leave the kind of minimal house bass presets, so if you want more sounds similar to the kind of bass ones we showed in this video, then I'll also leave that. If you got any value from this, then I'll once again ask if you can leave us a like, hit subscribe, comment what you want to see next. I'll leave a few videos on screen that I think you might enjoy, but for now, I'll see you later.